Hello, everyone, and welcome to our special lunch performance, One Voice, a Black History Narrative. Before we begin, I want to cover some housekeeping items. The performance will be recorded. Please leave your cameras and microphones muted throughout the performance. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature, and we will get to as many of them as we can at the end of the session. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our performer, Jeremiah Dew. Just under 60 years ago, the foundation of our nation was rattled by the 500,000 feet that made their way to the steps of Abraham Lincoln's memorial during the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. A young Baptist minister from Atlanta was the last speaker of the weekend's event. His poetic prose was a great beacon light of hope to millions of minorities in this country. And as he spoke, his legacy became etched into America's anthem with every stanza. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Christian American activist, husband, father, in quotes, Negro or African American. Jeremiah Dew is an entrepreneur and performer of Greenville, South Carolina. Today, he is joining us as an echo of that triumphant day. His stage experience, One Voice, a Black History Narrative, includes several iconic African-American characters that help paint the picture of where we have been as a country and where we are. Video interviews in today's program will come from Southern residents who will recount their firsthand experience of the way things were. As we celebrate Black history, we ask you how you too can use your one voice to have a positive impact on America's future as we celebrate Black and American history at Rowan-Cabarrus Community College. And now I introduce to you Jeremiah Dew.
Thank you so much, Ms. Williams, and good afternoon to each and every one of you. Thank you so much for being here. What we're going to do is we're going to see the virtual experience that I've curated especially for you all today. I do hail from Greenville, South Carolina. For the last 12 years, I've been able to present this experience normally on stage in person as a stage production. But today you're getting the behind the curtain feel of JDew speaking, because I'm about to turn into several iconic African-American characters, and I'm going to give them to you now. So because time is very, very tight on our session, I will entertain every few minutes. I will entertain some of the questions via the Q&A. So if you'd like to put them in, I'm going to step away so you guys can see these folks in their words and works and all their glory. I'll do the best that I can, but I'll come back every few minutes to check the Q&A. So I'm going to hopefully take over the control and turn things over to One Voice show for you. And we're going to experience it in the way that we all can share in the history and the rich words of these icons. So please let me know if there's any trouble hearing or seeing. Here we go.
I have a dream that my four little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
Generations of Americans have responded with a simple creed that sums up the spirit of a people. Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
I am the greatest. I am somebody.
I was born in Tuckahoe, near Hillsborough, and about 12 miles from Easton in Talbot County, Maryland. I have no accurate knowledge of my age, never having seen any authentic record containing it. By far the larger part of the slaves know as little of their ages as horses know of theirs, and it is the wish of most masters, within my knowledge, to keep their slaves thus ignorant. I do not remember to have ever met a slave who could tell of his birthday. They seldom come closer to it than planting time, harvest time, cherry time, springtime, or fall time. A want of information concerning my own was a source of unhappiness to me even during childhood. The white children could tell their ages. I could not tell why I ought to be deprived of the same privilege. I was not allowed to inquire of my master concerning it. He deemed all such inquiries on the part of a slave improper and impertinent, and evidence of a restless spirit. The nearest estimate I can give makes me now between 27 and 28 years of age. I come to this after hearing my master say, sometime during 1835, that I was about 17 years old. My mother was named Harriet Bailey. She was the daughter of Isaac and Betsy Bailey, both colored and quite dark. My mother was of a darker complexion than either my grandmother or grandfather. My father was a white man. He was admitted to be such by all I ever heard speak of my parentage. The opinion was also whispered that my master was my father. But of the correctness of this opinion I know nothing. The means of knowing was withheld from me. My mother and I were separated when I was but an infant, before I knew her as my mother. It is a common custom in the part of Maryland from which I ran away, to part children from their mothers at a very early age. Frequently, before the child has reached its 12th month, its mother is taken from it and hired out on some farm a considerable distance off, and the child is placed under the care of an old woman, too old for field labor. For what this separation is done, I do not know, unless it be to hinder the development of the child's affection toward its mother, and to blunt and destroy the natural affection of the mother for the child. This is the inevitable result. I never saw my mother, to know her as such, more than 4 or 5 times in my life, and each of these times was very short in duration and at night. She was hired by a Mr. Stewart, who lived about 12 miles from my home. She would journey to see me in the night, traveling the whole distance on foot after the performance of her day's work. She was a field hand, and a whipping is the penalty of not being in the field at sunrise, unless a slave has special permission of his or her master to the contrary, a permission which they seldom get, and one that gives to him that gives it the proud name of being a kind master. I never recollect seeing my mother by the light of day. She was with me in the night. She would lie down with me and get me to sleep, but long before I woke, she was gone. Very little communication took place between us. She died when I was about 7 years old on one of my master's farms near Lee's Mill. Never having enjoyed, to any considerable extent, her soothing presence, her tender and watchful care, I received the tidings of her death with much the same emotions I should have probably felt at the death of a stranger. Called thus suddenly away, she left me without the slightest intimation of who my father was. The opinion that my master was my father may or may not be true. And true or false, it is of but little consequence to my purpose, whilst the fact remains in all its glaring odiousness that slaveholders have ordained and by law established that the children of slave women shall in all cases follow the condition of their mothers. And this is done too obviously to administer to their own lusts and make a gratification of their wicked desires profitable as well as pleasurable. For by this strategic cunning, in cases not a few, the slaveholder sustains to his slaves the double relation of master and father. I know of such cases, and it is worthy of remark that such slaves invariably suffer greater hardships and have more to contend with than others. They are, in the first place, a constant offense to their mistress. She is ever disposed to find fault with them. They can seldom do anything to please her. She is never better pleased than when she sees them under the lash, especially when she suspects of her husband showing to his mulatto children favors which he withholds from his black slaves. Master is often compelled to sell this class of his slaves out of deference to the feelings of his white wife. And cruel as the deed may strike anyone to be, for a man to sell his own children to human fleshmongers, it is often the dictate of humanity for him to do so, for unless he does this, he must not only whip them himself, but must stand by and watch one white son tie up his brother, of but a few shades darker complexion than himself, and ply the gory lash to his naked back. And if master lisp one word of disapproval, it is set down to his parental partiality, and only makes a bad matter worse, both for himself and for the slave, whom he would protect and defend. Every year brings with it multitudes of this class of slaves. It was doubtless in consequence of a knowledge of this fact that one great statesman of the South predicted the downfall of slavery by the inevitable laws of population. Whether this prophecy is ever fulfilled or not, it is nevertheless plain that a very different looking class of people are springing up at the South and are now held in slavery from those originally brought to this country from Africa. And if their increase do no other good, it will do away the force of the argument that God cursed Ham. Therefore, American slavery is right. If the lineal descendants of Ham are alone to be scripturally enslaved, it is obvious that slavery at the South must soon become unscriptural, for thousands are ushered into this world annually who, like myself, owe their existence to white fathers, and those fathers most frequently their own masters. I have had two masters. My first master's name was Anthony. I do not remember his first name. He was generally called Captain Anthony, a title he acquired, I presume, by sailing a craft on the Chesapeake Bay. He was not considered a rich slaveholder. He owned 2 or 3 farms and about 30 slaves. His farms and slaves were under the care of an overseer. The overseer's name was Plummer. Mr. Plummer was a miserable drunkard, a profane swearer, and a savage monster. He always went armed with a cowskin and a heavy cudgel. I have known him to cut and slash the women's heads so horribly that even master would be enraged at his cruelty and would threaten to whip him if he did not mind himself. Master, however, was not a humane slaveholder. It required extraordinary barbarity on the part of an overseer to affect him. He was a cruel man, hardened by the long life of slaveholding. He would at times seem to take great pleasure in whipping a slave. I have often been awakened at the dawn of day by the most heartrending shrieks of an own aunt of mine, whom he used to tie up to a joist and whip upon her till she was literally covered with blood. No words, no tears, no prayers from his gory victim seemed to move his iron heart from its bloody purpose. The louder she screamed, the harder he whipped, and where the blood ran fastest, there he whipped longest. He would whip her to make her hush, whip her to make her scream. And not until overcome by fatigue would he cease to swing the blood-clotted cowskin. I remember the first time I ever witnessed this horrible exhibition. I was quite a child, but I well remember it. I never shall forget it whilst I remember anything. It was the first of a long series of such outrages of which I was due to be a witness and a participant. It struck me with awful force. It was the blood-stained gate, the entrance to the hell of slavery through which I was about to pass. It was a most terrible spectacle. I wish I could commit to paper the feelings with which I beheld it. This first occurrence took place very soon after I went to live with my old master, and under the following circumstances. Aunt Hester went out one night. Where or for what, I do not know. and happened to be absent when master desired her presence. He had ordered her not to go out evenings and warned her that she must never let him catch her in company with a young man who was paying attention to her belonging to Colonel Lloyd. The young man's name was Ned Roberts, generally called Lloyd's Ned. Why master was so careful of her may be safely left to conjecture. She was a woman of noble form and graceful proportions, having very few equals in personal appearance among the colored or white women of our neighborhood. Had he been thought a virtuous man, you may have thought he was trying to protect the innocence of my aunt, but those who knew him would not suspect him of any such virtue. Before he commenced whipping Aunt Hester, he took her into the kitchen and stripped her from neck to waist, leaving her neck, shoulders, and back entirely naked. He then told her to cross her hands, calling her at the same time. After crossing her hands, he tied them with a strong rope and led her to a stool under a large hook in the joist put in for the purpose. He made her get upon the stool and tied her hands to the hook. She now stood fair for his infernal purpose. Her arms were stretched up at their full length so that she stood upon the ends of her toes. He then said to her, "Now you, I'll learn you how to disobey my orders." And after rolling up his sleeves, he commenced to lay on the heavy cowskin. And soon the warm, red blood, amid heart-rending shrieks from her and horrid oaths from him, came dripping to the floor. I was so terrified and horror-stricken that I ran and hid myself in a closet and dared not venture out till long after the bloody transaction was over. I'd never seen anything like it. I thought it would be my turn next. I had always lived with my grandmother on the outskirts of the plantation, where she was put to raise the children of the younger women. I had therefore been, until now, out of the way of the bloody scenes that often occurred on the plantation.
In my first year of seminary, 59-60, there arose a consciousness we can't eat at the public lunch counters. So with the 6 schools in Atlanta, they're in Atlanta University Center, Morehouse, Spelman, Clark, AU, Morris Brown, and ITC, which is a graduate school, we formulated a group called the Committee on Appeal for Human Rights and developed a manifesto and talked about all the things, it was just unjust that we couldn't go downtown. So we had meetings from campus to campus, and I guess it was 200-300 students, but we met at places. Then we decided, in October, we decided this was going to be the time when we would, as a group, go out and sit in at the lunch counters. And we invited Dr. King, who had just come to Atlanta from Montgomery, to be a co-pastor with his father. We said, well, why don't we ask Dr. King if he would join us? And we asked him, and he readily accepted. But he wouldn't accept the leadership role. That was an amazing point, I think, about him. I learned how humble he was. He would not accept the leadership role, even when the media asked him, what do you think about it? He said, I'm not the leader of this group. And Dr. King, as one of his books shows, that you had to sign a commitment card that said, I will be nonviolent. If I am hit, I won't hit back. If I'm kicked, I won't retaliate. And we were taught how to protect yourself, try to protect your head, or keep yourself from getting injured. But anyway, so October 19th, 1960, we decided that's the target date. We met, 200 or 300 students. We were going at all the lunch counters in Atlanta. And I remember we would go from one to another, and when we would go there and sit down, all of a sudden, when you request to be served, some of them would just cut the lights off and said, we're closed. Some would just let you sit there. Of course, we would heckle, protesters, instigators would be behind you, calling your name, and sometimes they'd pour stuff on you, or do different things. But we decided we would go in, and if we were arrested, we would not come out of jail until they dropped the charges. And the charges generally was criminal trespassing. So I went, and I was arrested at, I went to different sites, but ended up at Rich's, at the Magnolia Room. That's where I was arrested. And of course, we were escorted out. I don't think I was handcuffed, but we were escorted out, put in a paddy wagon, taken to Fulton County Jail. And that's where we spent the bulk of the week in there. And it was a great experience. There were 51 students, kind of half and half, male and female. In our cell, I think, along with Dr. King, it was about seven or eight of us. In jail was a great time. We had time to fellowship, to discuss, dialogue. We lived in there. We sang. We did all kind of stuff. And of course, we couldn't stay in. We couldn't sleep. They would close the door between your sleeping quarters and your day room. That's what you. And they had a bench there, iron bench, and that's where you spend. Dr. King and I used to sit in the corner and we discuss different things, books and subjects. And you were there just to, they maybe let you out, take a walk every now and then. But there no privacy. You did everything right there in the jail. We used to have, we decided we weren't going to shave while we were in there, so we grew a little beard for a few days. And, but we learned a lot about each other. We bonded. We decided that Saturday that we were going to have a service Sunday morning in the jail. And we asked Dr. King to bring the sermon. As I've said on some other occasions, somebody must have known about the experience in the Bible of Paul and Silas in the Philippian jail. You remember they jailed them, and at midnight they had a song and a prayer, and there was an earthquake, and the jail shook and the doors came open. So they told us that Saturday night, look, we will drop the charge. Y'all just leave the jail. And we left the jail late that Saturday night, and I think I was the last student. Dr. King was there on another charge. Not only was it charge of the criminal trespassing, but they had a charge on him about driver's license or something else. So we had to leave him in the jail. I didn't want to leave him. I really wanted. And I was like I was the last person. And when I got ready to leave, I looked back and I told him goodbye. But I didn't want to leave him. He said, "I will be all right." He said, "Y'all go on. I'm fine." And I remember that night. It was very touching experience for me. We go back. I went back to the campus, but he was still in jail.
Here tonight and plead with you. Believe in yourself and believe that you're somebody. As I said to a group last night, nobody else can do this for us. No document can do this for us. No Lincolnian Emancipation Proclamation can do this for us. No Kennysonian or Johnsonian Civil Rights Bill can do this for us. If the Negro is to be free, he must move down into the inner resources of his own soul and sign with a pen and ink of self-assertive manhood his own Emancipation Proclamation.
At this time, I have the honor to present to you the moral leader of our nation. I have the pleasure to present to you Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr.
I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. 50 years ago, a great American, in whose symbolic shadow we stand today, signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro has languished to the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. So we have come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. In a sense, we have come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the inalienable rights of life,
liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. So we have come to cash this check, a check which will give us, upon demand, the riches of freedom and the security of justice. We have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children. It would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment. This sweltering summer of the Negro's legitimate discontent will not pass until there is an invigorating autumn of freedom and equality. 1963 is not an end, but a beginning. And for those who hope that the Negro needed to blow off steam and will now be content, will have a rude awakening if the nation returns to business as usual. There will be neither rest nor tranquility in America until the Negro is granted his citizenship rights. The whirlwinds of revolt will continue to shake the foundations of this nation until the bright day of justice emerges. But there is something that I must say to my people who stand on the warm threshold which leads into the palace of justice. In the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. We must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. We must never allow our creative protest to degenerate into physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. The marvelous new militancy which has engulfed the Negro community must not lead us to a distrust of all white people. For many of our white brothers, as evidenced by their presence here today, have come to realize that their destiny is tied up with our destiny. They have come to realize that their freedom is inextricably bound to our freedom. We cannot walk alone. And as we walk, we must make the pledge that we shall always march ahead. We cannot turn back. There are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. We cannot be satisfied as long as our bodies, heavy with the fatigue of travel, cannot gain lodging in the motels of the highways and the hotels of the cities. We cannot be satisfied as long as a Negro's basic mobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one. We can never be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their selfhood and robbed of their dignity by signs stating "for whites only." We cannot be satisfied as long as a Negro in Mississippi cannot vote and a Negro in New York believes he has nothing for which to vote. No, no, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. I am not unmindful that many of you have come here today out of great trials and tribulations. Many of you have come fresh from narrow jail cells. Many of you have come from areas where your quest for freedom left you battered by the storms of persecution and staggered by the winds of police brutality. You have been the veterans of creative suffering. Continue to work with the faith that unearned suffering is redemptive. Go back to Mississippi. Go back to Alabama. Go back to South Carolina. Go back to Georgia. Go back to Louisiana. Go back to the slums and ghettos of our northern cities, knowing that somehow this situation can and will be changed. Let us not wallow in the valley of despair. I say to you today, my friends. And so even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day, on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even in the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will one day be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. I have a dream that every valley shall be exalted. Every hill and mountain will be made low. The rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope, and this is the faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. And this will be the day. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning. My country, 'tis of thee. Sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. And so let freedom ring from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire. Let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York. Let freedom ring from the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania. Let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado. Let freedom ring from the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And when this happens, when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing together in the words of the old Negro spiritual. Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, thank you, New Hampshire. I love you back. Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you so much. I am still fired up and ready to go. Thank you. Thank you.
You know, a few weeks ago, no one could have imagined that we'd have accomplished what we did here tonight. No one would have imagined it. For most of this campaign, we are far behind. We always knew our climb would be steep. But in record numbers, you came out and spoke up for change. And with your voices and your votes, you made it clear that at this time, in this election, there is something happening in America. There is something happening when men and women from Des Moines and Davenport, from Lebanon and Concord, come out in the snows of January to wait in lines that stretch block after block because they believe in what this country can be. There is something happening when people who are young in age and in spirit, who have never participated in politics before, turn out in numbers we have never seen because they know in their hearts that this time must be different. There is something happening when people vote, not just for the party they belong to, but for the hopes that they hold in common. That whether we are rich or poor, black or white, Latino or Asian, whether we hail from Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, or South Carolina, we are ready to take this country in a fundamentally new direction. That's what's happening in America right now. Change is what's happening in America right now. You, all you who are here tonight, all you who have put so much heart and soul and work into this campaign, you can be the new majority who can help lead this nation out of a long political darkness. Democrats, independents, and Republicans who are tired of the division and the distraction that has clouded Washington, who know that we can disagree without being disagreeable, who understand that if we mobilize our voices to challenge the money and influence that stood in our way and challenged ourselves to reach for something better, there is no problem that we cannot solve, no destiny that we cannot fulfill. Our new American majority can end the outrage of unaffordable, unavailable health care in our time. We can bring doctors and patients, workers and businesses, Democrats and Republicans together, and we can tell the drug and insurance industry that while they get a seat at the table, they don't get to buy every share. Not this time, not now. Our new majority can end the tax breaks for corporations that ship our jobs overseas and put a middle-class tax cut in the pockets of working Americans who deserve it. We can stop sending our children to schools with corridors of shame and start putting them on a pathway to success. We can stop talking about how great teachers are and start rewarding them for their greatness by giving them more pay and more support. We can do this with our new majority. We can harness the ingenuity of farmers and scientists, citizens and entrepreneurs to help free this nation from the tyranny of oil and save our planet from a point of no return. And when I am president of the United States, we will end this war and bring our troops home. We will finish the job against Al-Qaeda in Iraq and Afghanistan. We will support our veterans. We will restore our moral standing in the world. And we will never use 9/11 as a way to scare votes. For it is not a tactic to be used to win an election, but it is a challenge that should unite America and the world against the common threats of the 21st century. Terrorism and nuclear weapons, climate change and poverty, genocide and disease. All of the candidates in this race share these goals. All of the candidates in this race have good ideas. And all are patriots who serve this country honorably. But the reason our campaign has always been different, the reason we started this improbable journey almost a year ago, is because it's not just about what I will do as president. It's also about what you, the people who love this country, the citizens of the United States of America, can do to change. That's what this election is all about. That's why tonight belongs to you. It belongs to the organizers, the staff, and the volunteers who believed in our improbable journey and rallied so many others to join the cause. We know that the battle ahead will be long, but always remember that no matter what obstacles stand in our way, nothing can withstand the power of millions of voices calling for change. We've been told that we cannot do this by a chorus of cynics who will only grow louder and more dissonant in the weeks and months to come. We've been asked to pause for a reality check. We've been warned of giving these people of this nation false hope. But in the unlikely story that is America, there's never been anything false about hope. For when we face down impossible odds, when we've been told that we're not ready, or that we shouldn't try, or that we can't, Generations of Americans have responded with a simple creed that sums up the spirit of a people. Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Yes, we can. It was a creed written into the founding documents that declared the destiny of a nation. Yes, we can. It was whispered by slaves and abolitionists as they blazed a trail toward freedom through the darkest of nights. Yes, we can. It was sung by immigrants as they struck out from distant shores and pioneers who pushed westward against an unforgiving wilderness. Yes, we can. It was the call of workers who organized, women who reached for the ballot, a president who chose the moon as our new frontier, and a king who took us to the mountaintop and pointed the way to the promised land. Yes, we can to justice and equality. Yes, we can to opportunity and prosperity. Yes, we can heal this nation. Yes, we can restore this world. Yes, we can. And so tomorrow, as we take the campaign south and west, as we discover that the struggles of the textile workers of Spartanburg are not so different from the plight of the dishwasher in Las Vegas, that the hopes of the little girl who goes to the crumbling school in Dillon are the same as the dreams of the boy who learns on the streets of LA, we will remember that there is something happening in America, that we are not as divided as our politics suggests, that we are one people, one nation, and together we will begin the next great chapter of the American story with 3 words that will ring from coast to coast, from sea to shining sea. Yes, we can. Thank you.
Help us then now, Lord, to work for that day when nation shall not lift up sword against nation, when tanks will be beaten into tractors, when every man and every woman shall sit under his or her own vine and fig tree, and none shall be afraid, when justice will roll down like waters and righteousness as a mighty stream. Lord, in the memory of all the saints who from their labors rest, and in the joy of a new beginning, we ask you to help us work for that day when black will not be asked to get back, when brown can stick around, when yellow will be mellow, when the red man can get ahead, man, and when white will embrace what is right. Let all those who do justice and love mercy say amen. Say amen and amen.
And he stirred it up well. Then he spread it over a span of a lifetime, and he served it to each and every deserving person.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, hope you enjoyed your lunch hour. And thank you so much for participating with us today, and me with this creation that I've come up with to bring us back into the mindset, the memories, the voices, the words of all these great folks, ones that are still with us today, like Dr. Grady Butler, who lives in my town, Greenville, South Carolina, and also, of course, the icons, the voices that I do, and bring them back for us so we can remember in the context of the culture of what they were dealing with. And as we challenge ourselves to use our voices now, 2022 and moving forward, to enact that powerful change that we need when we see it. So thank you so much. I'm seeing a couple of things here. I'm sure some of you have to go. Thank you so much. I'm going to answer some of these. Well, I guess it's just you're welcome. A lot of thank you so far. So once again, my name is JDew, Jeremiah Dew. I live in Greenville, South Carolina. So I'm about 2 hours maybe away from where our host campus is at Rowan-Cabarrus. Thank you. Amen and amen out there. So thank you so much. You can find me at onevoiceshow.com. So if there's other opportunities for me to come live, of course, or maybe to be a part of something that you're challenging your areas of influence. Churches, corporate groups, schools do things on site and in person all the time. And I've been doing this for about 12 years. So onevoiceshow.com. Thank you so much. Any questions for me? Any questions? I don't want to miss those, but you're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you so much.
I don't see any questions, but I am one that has to leave because I have to get ready for the next session to start. So there are a lot of thank yous. And so I do want to thank everyone for attending the One Voice of Black History Narrative performance. Jeremiah, we really do appreciate this performance. I don't even know what to say, right? So you all, thank you. Enjoy the rest of the conference. So I am going to end this session, and thank you all again for attending. Bye, everybody.